Thank you for joining us online. Cornerstone is a church located in Rockwall, Texas, and our desire is that you encounter God and walk in relationship with Him. If you want to know more about our church or want to join us in person, you can find our service times on our website at cornerstonerockwall.com. We pray that this message is a blessing to you and your family.
Well, good morning, Cornerstone. How you guys doing? Woo-woo! For those of you who don't know, my name's Dustin. I'm part of the team here at Cornerstone. I'm not Scott, and so I won't have a Kentuckian accent. Kentucky, I don't even know what to call it. But anyways, Scott's out. He and his family are on vacation, and then he's got some work trips. And so he asked me to jump in and to continue in our wisdom series. So if you guys have been with us, you know we've been walking through the different wisdom literature that's in the Scripture. We've got wisdom literature all over the Bible, but specifically we've talked about Psalms, we've talked about Job, we've talked about Ecclesiastes. We're going to be talking about Proverbs next week. We're in our last 2 weeks, and I get the distinct privilege of taking on the book Song of Songs. And don't think that that was an accident on Scott's part at all. No, it's actually really cool. The subtitle we've had for the series is this idea of finding clarity in confusion. And let's be honest, there's a ton of things in our world that we would say that there's confusion around, right? Like we deal with confusing things or things that don't seem super obvious to us all day, every day. But there is probably not a topic that is more confusing emotionally, relationally, spiritually, culturally, than the reality of sexual identity, sexuality, human sexuality, how God has designed it and desires it to be. And so we're going to dive into this little book in the middle of your Old Testament called Song of Songs. So if you have your Bible and you want to kind of flip over there, I would encourage you to do so. When I was 13 or 14, right in that ballpark, you start dating 12, 13, right? You're starting to kind of check out girls. Suddenly girls become interesting. You're like, oh, if you're a guy, you're like, whoa, like she's way more fun than riding a bicycle to hang out with, right? And there was this girl that I was interested in middle school. It was like late middle school. Still remember her name, but I'm not going to share it. Anyways, and so I was like, we kind of started like hanging out a little bit, and I'm like, how do I express all the 14-year-old emotion that's inside of me? So I did what every 14-year-old in the 80s did, which is I made her a mixtape, right? Like, that's what you do, right? You take, right? Wait, hold on. A tape is a thing that we had when we were kids, and what it was is like literally it's tape inside of a spool, and you could tape music onto it. So to bring it to your vernacular, I shared a Spotify playlist with her. Is that probably how you guys would do it? Anyone? David, is that how you do it? Okay, Spotify playlist, cool. Anyways, so I did. I shared a mixtape with her, and I was like, I even remember some of the songs on it, but I'm not going to tell you those. Because, no, I'm not going to. Hey, that's near and dear to my heart, bro. I'm holding on to that one. Anyways, and so as I was thinking about this week, that is actually a really good picture of what Song of Songs is. It's an ancient Hebrew mixtape. So just picture Hebrew John Mayer and Hebrew Taylor Swift singing songs to one another. Like he's telling her body's a wonderland, and she's telling him, I will never, ever, ever, right? Like there's this thing going on back and forth. And that, I'm joking, but it actually is a really good illustration of what, at least at its basic principle, what Song of Songs is. Song of Songs is a collection of poetry that talks about human sexual intimacy. And it's kind of this collection of poems that go back and forth between a husband. Well, first that's where it's like an engaged couple, and then it moves into a married couple. Now, that's not all Song of Songs is. Like with honestly, any good poetry you would read today or songs you would listen to today, there's a sense of, there's multiple meanings within it, right? Like there's double entendre. We get all this kind of stuff that's in there. And Song of Songs is no different. And historically, Jewish people have believed that there's a sense, in a sense, Song of Songs is also a picture of Israel's relationship with God. And so that they've used it. Actually, it was read, parts of Song of Songs were read at Passover meals for a long time. So there's a sense that it also does that. And then in a more modern tradition, the Christian church, as it early started, it kind of took that same principle of like, okay, if in the Old Testament there was a picture of Israel and God's relationship, then in the New Testament, in the new church, there was a picture, the sense that the Song of Songs is also a picture of Jesus' relationship to the church, right? And we see that play out in Ephesians where Paul says, hey, like talking about marriage, but really I'm talking about this deeper thing of God, Jesus' relationship to his bride or his church. And so it isn't not those things. Sometimes there's a tendency in some of these like weird poetic literatures to draw like a hard line. Like we just go, hey, it's either this or that. The reality is it's probably both. But fundamentally, if you just look at the text for what it is, it's an ancient Hebrew mixtape. Now, in chapter 1, verse 1, if you got your book, and we're going to be doing kind of a flyover of the whole thing, but one of the things it does, so one of the things that Song of Songs does, and this is what we're going to focus in on today. We could jump into the allegorical part of it. We're not going to do that today. We don't have time. But one of the things it does do is it shows us that sexual intimacy is something that was designed by God. Like that this was his idea. This is not our idea. We don't govern it. It was his idea. And you see this all the way back in Genesis, right? Genesis 2:25, the culmination of the creation narrative, right? God speaks creation into existence and he does all of this work and he says, it's so good, it's very good. And then the culmination of that at the end of Genesis 2 is 25. It says, and the man and woman were both naked and they felt no shame. That is a picture of perfect human relationship flourishing, naked and no shame. And to juxtapose that, right after that, Genesis 3, the fall happens, and what's the next thing we see Adam and Eve do in response to the fall? They cover themselves and they hide. And so there's something about how sexuality and intimacy is woven into the fabric of God's design and how that actually plays out significantly in how we live. And so here's the reality, and I want to kind of like, it's going to be important for us all to hold on to as we get into this topic. Every one of us, because we are all subject to the fall, is sexually broken. Every one of you. Nobody is not sexually broken. Now, whether that brokenness, however those fractures have played out in your life, is different for all of us. But every human being is subject to the fall and thus sexually broken in some way, some shape, and some form. And normally we see it play out in two kind of generalized areas. One is this idea of like a stifled sexuality, where in essence sex is seen as the enemy, like sexual desire is seen as the enemy. And what happens then, oftentimes this happens in church cultures a lot, then purity almost becomes a god unto itself. And so you see this kind of like rigidity and there's kind of like this suppression of any kind of conversations or thoughts or talk or anything around sexuality. There's a big movement in the 80s and 90s called the purity culture. There was some good in the purity culture. There was a lot of bad in the purity culture. It was about stifling or suppressing the reality of human desire. Then on the other side of the coin, you have kind of an excessive sexuality, right? This is where sexuality actually becomes God. It becomes the means by which we find our value and our hope and our peace. And this is what we see in our culture so often, right? That somehow my identity is totally wrapped up into how I experience my sexuality. And neither of those are in alignment with what we're going to learn today. And neither of those are actually, you could say, the third way that God proposes with sexuality. That he offers us this flourishing sexuality where what happens is God determines our value, our hope, and our identity. And then sexuality becomes what it's supposed to be, and intimacy becomes what it's supposed to be, which is a gift given by God to husbands and wives in the context of a mutual covenant for a lifelong commitment. And so what we want to do, and my encouragement to you is as we kind of dive into this morning is it's going to be really easy, as it is oftentimes, right, to kind of think about someone else you know who struggles with this, or maybe even your spouse, depending on if you're sitting next to them or not, right? It's going to be really easy to kind of think sideways And here's my encouragement to you. I want you to really take the time to self-reflect. What is it that the Lord wants to expose in you? What is it that the Spirit wants to shape and mold and help you understand about his design and desire for sexuality? And how have you seen it wrong? How have you seen it right? How do you need to change your thought process? How do you need to change the way you interact with your spouse or with someone you're dating or whatever it would be? But my encouragement to you, my challenge to you is let's take the time this morning as we reflect on the book to really kind of look at ourselves and see what it is God wants to teach us. Is that cool? Okay, well, let's pray, and then we're going to dive into it. Jesus, we thank you for this morning. And Lord, I thank you that you have given us you've given us intimacy and sexuality as a gift. And it's not something to be feared. And it's also not something that we would attach our value and our hope to. And Lord, we want to be a people who walk in wisdom when it comes to this. We don't want to swing too far to one side or the other, and we know it's a slippery slope, and we know it's messy, and that's why we need your Spirit. Because none of this can be done. We can't do this in our own strength. We can't figure this out in our own strength. It's not about our ability to understand or our brains or our self-discipline. It's not necessarily at its root about any of that. It's about you working in and through the hearts of your people. And so we ask for that, Lord. I ask that you would do that work in me and that you would do that work in each one of us this morning. We give you this time in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, so now go to verse 1 of Song of Songs. And like I said, we're going to do a flyover. So we're not going to nitpick a bunch of verses. We don't have time to. But what I want to do is give you kind of a basic flyover and a kind of like 3 primary themes that do come out of the whole Song of Songs. So if you look at verse 1, so depending on your translation, like ESV says, this is the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. So if you were to look at the original Hebrew, it's the Song of Solomon. Now, in English, that can be a little bit deceiving as far as what it means. There's a ton of debate over whether or not Solomon actually wrote Song of Songs. Good guys on both sides argue it. I personally land on that he probably didn't. Because here's the reality. Solomon was not a one-woman man. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And this, as you read it, is really about this singular relationship between a husband and a wife, primarily. I do think, though, that it was written in what they would call the wisdom tradition of Solomon. So could Solomon have commissioned it? Did he go, hey, I want wisdom around sexuality, and so he commissioned its writing? Maybe, we don't really know. But what we do know, that it's called the Song of Songs, which is like, in our culture, we use the vernacular like the best of the best. And so that's what it means. It's like, this is the song that's above every other song. There's no song better than this song. And this song that is above every other song is written in the tradition of Solomon. And so we know it's in the wisdom tradition. And so that's a great starting point, just to kind of go, like, this is where we land with this book. Because I believe that it is the song that is above all other songs written in the wisdom tradition of Solomon. Whether he wrote it or not, we're really never going to know this side of eternity. In it, we have 3 primary characters. You have the he, or the male, which he's called the lover, my love, beloved, king, a bunch of different names. And then there's she, and she's like the primary. So she's really kind of the primary narrator through the whole book. And she's called my lover, beloved, my bride, sister, daughter, the Shulamite woman, which Shulamite is just kind of a feminine construct of the name Solomon in many ways. And so she's a Solomonic woman. So does that mean that she's like a woman of wisdom or something to that degree? We don't really know, but that's kind of how it's thing. And then you have this other crowd that are called the Daughters of Jerusalem, who are a part of it as well. And so you kind of see these 3 characters, for lack of a better term, the he, and then the she, and then this other group that's kind of a part of it in certain locations. It is, by all accounts, one of the most difficult collections of Scripture to understand. It's not what you probably gravitate to in your quiet times. There is a lot of debate. Some of the most difficult Hebrew sentence constructs in the whole Bible are in Song of Songs. And so the reality is, I'm comfortable with where I've landed. It's the best of my abilities to understand what it's saying and to present that to you. I'm not at all saying I'm right on all of it. And any good scholar would agree, we only can do what we can do, right? We have enough trouble understanding, modern day poetry, right? How many of us read a modern poem and we're like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about? This is 2,000-year-old ancient Hebrew poetry. Like, we have no context for this. And so we're all kind of fishing. Now, I do believe that translators have done a good job trying to hone in on the themes, which is why that's where we're going to focus our attention today. And so what we're going to do is we're going to really look at three primary themes that come out of Song of Songs. And what they do is they give us really a clarity about what God's desire is for how sexual intimacy can and should flourish, okay? So here's the first one. If you're making notes, these little 3-point things might be helpful to you. The first thing we see that we find out about human sexuality that helps it to flourish is that that intimacy is pursued intentionally. That intimacy in the Song of Songs, what you see in the context of this relationship is that it's pursued intentionally. And you see this desire is good, right? You see the desire for one another physically is good. That attraction, the desire for the relationship, the desire for it to grow, the desire for it to flourish, it's all good. First 3 chapters are basically the core, 2.5 chapters really are like a courtship. And what's really interesting is the language isn't very explicit in chapters 1 and 2. It's a little more subtle. It doesn't get explicit until chapter 4 and then on from there. But what you see is this in chapter 1, you see his desire or her desire for him and then his desire for her. And I'm going to read a couple of the things. So this is chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. And this is her talking. And she says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is more delightful than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. Take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers," right? So you can see her like, no wonder, like, dude, you're so hot. Like, no wonder all the girls like you, right? So you see this desire. Now, granted, this is in their courtship. So this is pre-wedding ceremony and pre-marriage, but there's still a desire there, right? She's still longing. And then right after that in chapter 1, verse 6, she says this. She says, "Do not stare at me because I am dark, because I am darkened by the sun. My mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care in the vineyards. My own vineyards I had to neglect." And what you kind of see here is a little bit of insecurity in her. She's like, "Look at how amazing you are, but don't look at me. Like, I'm kind of dark-skinned, so clearly this woman had a dark complexion, and that was an insecurity for her." And so she has this longing for him and a desire for him, but she's like, "Hey, like you're amazing, but like, I'm not that, I'm dark, I'm not like the other girls," right? And then what does he say right after that? If you look at verses 9 and 10, he says, "I liken you, my darling, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariot horses." That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Go ahead, try and call your wife a horse and see how that goes. Sorry, I digress. He says, "Your cheeks are beautiful with earrings, your neck with strings of jewels." And then in verse 15, he says, "How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful your eyes are doves." So you just see, like, even in these couple of verses, you see this fact that there's a desire, there's an intimacy that's being pursued intentionally. They're talking about it. They're sharing with each other, like, "Hey, like, you're amazing. I'm super excited to be with you. I can't wait for us to be together," right? And that you see that over and over again through the whole thing, all of the chapters, you clearly see that intimacy is something that is to be pursued intentionally. Here's what's really cool about it. 3 times, and they're very specific times throughout the course of the book, there's a verse, or there's a repeated verse that basically restrains the desire. So in chapter 2, verse 7, chapter 3, verse 5, and chapter 8, verse 4, she says to her friends, remember the daughters of Jerusalem, she says, "Do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires." Which is basically what she's saying, like, hey, desire is good, but don't get ahead of the curve. Like, don't get ahead of where it should be. Like, again, we're not trying to suppress or repress desire, but we also don't want it just to run rampant. And so there's a tension, right? That we live in a tension. There's a tension in our lives, and in this, even though there's this clear, mandate's probably too strong, a clear sense that they are pursuing one another intentionally, they're pursuing this intimacy or this growing relationship, it's also something that needs to be restrained. It needs to be protected. And what that means for us is that for a married couple, that a healthy love, affection, attraction to one another is going to be pursued intentionally. Like, it's not passive. And that's hard, right? Because, early on it's easy because you're like, it's the honeymoon phase and everything's amazing. But then years go by, kids come in, things change, right? There's this ebb and flow of life. We'll talk more about that. But in order for sexual intimacy to flourish in a marriage, it has to be pursued intentionally. Physically, emotionally, relationally, verbally. That is, it's not about what we get out of it, but it's what we give to the other. That's the primary thing we see. And that may also what we see in here is that, like, for singles, for those of you who are single or dating, that it has to be restrained as well. Look, there's desires you have all day, every day that you don't give yourself to, that you restrain, right? You get cut off in traffic. You have a desire in that moment. Hopefully you don't act on that desire, right? So restraint is nothing new. But the fact that there's desire doesn't mean desire itself is inherently bad. And so there's a tension, right? Especially for those of you who are single. That as you move further along your life, as you find that other person that you're wanting to get to know and spend time with, like, that desire is not necessarily bad or wrong. But it has to be restrained. It has to be governed. It has to be protected because you're protecting a gift that God is saving for you. Tim Keller, in his book on marriage, says this. He says, biblical sexuality has far more to do with what we should be giving ourselves to rather than what we should avoid. And I think that's actually really helpful in this. That really, like, for those of you who are single, obviously the goal is that you would be wise and restrained, that you wouldn't just suppress things, but you would walk in meaningful accountability, that there would be conversations with whoever you're dating, that you would set clear boundaries, that you would be wise with those boundaries, that you would be protective of yourself because you are not the other person's. But then for those of us who are married, like, sometimes we get so fixated on not doing the wrong things that we forget to do the right things. Like, we get so fixated over here, like, I got to stop doing, I got to make sure we don't. And we forget to actually, that sometimes, like I would say in this area especially, the best defense is a good offense. Like, become an expert in pursuing your spouse. Become an expert in loving them well. Become an expert in chasing after them with everything that you have. That desire is good. It should be verbal. It should be relational. It should be physical, right? Like, all of that works together as we learn to love and serve one another. And Song of Songs over and over and over shows us this, that intimacy has to be pursued intentionally. If you're standing still, you're actually not standing still. You're moving backwards. There is no standing still. And so there's this relentless pursuit of one another. So that's the first thing. Intimacy is to be pursued intentionally. The second thing is intimacy is to be experienced mutually. So like I said, chapter 1 and 2 is kind of like the dating and courtship. Chapter 3 is really kind of the marriage ceremony, and you see this whole thing where the king comes in and he's got his big couch, and she's like, Kyle, what color is your couch, man? I want to be on your couch. And then there's this whole ceremony. And then from there it translates, and the language does get far more explicit after chapter 3. Like, as the relationship is consummated, it begins to build. And you see that if you want to flip over to chapter 4, verse 16. And then we're going to look at 5:1. So this is that culmination. This is that spot. They've done the wedding ceremony, and this is the next thing. And she says, awaken north wind and come south wind. Blow on my garden that its fragrance may spread everywhere. Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruits. And then 5:1, he says, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. So what you see is this mutuality. And here's what I want you to notice in that passage specifically. Notice she invites him in to that intimacy. And notice that it's possessive on both sides. She is his and he is hers. Right? That there's, and Corinthians talks about this. Like, my body is no longer my own, it's my wife's, and my wife's body is no longer her own, it's mine, right? There's a mutuality in it. And it's to be experienced mutually. And we see this more and more throughout it. So again, I know you guys are bouncing passages. You can just listen if you don't want to flip. So chapter 4, verses 1-4, it says this. This is what he says about her. He says, how beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful your eyes behind your veil, and doves. Your hairs are like flock of goats descending from the hills of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing. Each has its twin. Not one of them is alone. Your lips are like scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like the halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with course of stone. On it hangs 1,000 shields, and all of them shields of warriors. And then she retorts later on in chapter 5. She says, my beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is pure as gold. His hair is wavy and black as the ravens. His eyes are like doves by the water, streams washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like beds of spice, yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are rods of gold set with topaz. It's getting intense, isn't it? His body is like polished ivory, decorating with lapis lazuli. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. And then he says in chapter 4, earlier on in chapter 4, verse 9, he says, you have stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You have stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. How pleasing is your love more than wine, and its fragrance of your perfume more than any spice. And in chapter 2, earlier on, she says, my beloved is mine and I am him, and I am his. And here's what you see in all of that: mutuality. Intimacy experienced mutually, all through the whole book. You see physical attraction, you see emotional attraction and intimacy, and you see relational attraction and intimacy. I am his, he is mine, right? This is my beloved. There's a reality that is not just about physical satisfaction, but there's this holistic thing going on in their relationship. What does that mean for us? It means that that sexual intimacy is mutually self-giving. It's not about personal satisfaction. Let me say that again. Sexual intimacy is not about personal satisfaction, biblically. It's about you giving yourself to another, fully and wholly. It's about this mutuality in this. A lady named Sheila Ray Gregory wrote a book called The Great Sex Rescue, and she says this: you cannot force passion. Passion flows from the ability to be vulnerable, which flows from the ability to trust, which flows from safe relationships. That's so important for us to remember, married couples and singles too. Like, this is going to be important for you at a point. That sexual intimacy is always designed to be mutual. And so here's what that might mean. For us guys, if we're struggling with intimacy, if we're struggling to feel like on the same page with our spouse is, it's very easy for us to look at them and be like, come on, like, what's going on? It's really hard for us to ask the question, wait, how well am I loving her? Does she feel safe? Does she feel heard? Does she feel cared for? Does my voice matter, or am I just an object so that he can feel satisfied? Again, sexual intimacy is not about gratification. It's about connection. And for wives, like, it's important for you to wrestle through. Like, if you're struggling with having desire, or have you ever asked yourself why? Have you ever explored, like, look, the reality of the human condition is that we're very, very complex beings. And so you've got physiological and hormonal changes, you've got psychological issues, you've got emotional challenges, you have kids, you have seasonal changes, all these things, work stress, right? All these things play into a relationship. And so there has to be a reality that there's communication in an ongoing way, that becomes over time a comfort with communicating about these things so that it remains mutual, so that the focus is on the mutuality of it. Because sexual intimacy is not primarily about you and your satisfaction. It's about you giving yourself to another. Here's one of the things that means that comes up in church world probably much more often than I would prefer. It means that you are not obligated to give sex to your spouse to keep them in line. Well, if you don't want his eyes to wander. No, Jesus clearly said if your right eye causes you to sin, you should gouge it out. It's mutuality. That doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean it just is like a silver bullet and it gets fixed really easily. It means it's work. But God has designed it to be mutual. That it's you giving yourself to them and them giving themselves to you in the context of a lifelong commitment. Really, it's about your desire to see the other one flourish more so than for yourself to be satisfied. And if I could encourage you with one thing, if you're wrestling or struggling in this area, don't let sex cover up the deeper issues in your marriage. It's a Band-Aid. Don't let it be a Band-Aid. Get down in the weeds. Deal with the real issues. Communicate with one another. Get help communicating if you need it. Go to a counselor. Talk to a pastor. Because God's designed it to flourish mutually, where both parties flourish, where both find joy and satisfaction and ultimately connection, because that's the goal. Stinking Scott gave me this topic. Trust me, he's going to hear about it. Third and lastly, intimacy is sustained graciously. And we kind of touched on this a little bit. Intimacy is sustained graciously. This is my favorite part of Song of Songs we're about to talk about. Because here's what you've got, again, we said chapter 3 is kind of the marriage, and then chapter 4 or into 5 is kind of this beginning of their intimacy and their relationship. And then as it continues, literally right after 5:1, right after she offers the garden and he goes into it, right after that, look at chapter 5, verses 2 and 3. This is worth turning to, especially if you're married. She says this, I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. My heart is drenched with dew. My hair is with the dampness of the night. I've taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I've washed my feet. Must I soil them again? You guys pick up what's going on there? He's nudging her. And she's like, I already washed my feet. I don't want to. I'm just going to bed. Matlock's on. I want to watch a rerun of Matlock, right? You see, I don't know, married people, is it resonating at all? I know it can, right? There's yeah, that's cool. Cool to know the ancient Hebrew people struggle with this stuff too. And so then right after that, right? So that's 5, 2, and 3. Look it down to 5, 6. She says, I opened for my beloved. So finally, she relents, but my beloved has left. He is gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called to him, but he did not answer. Homeboy bolts. Homeboy gets frustrated. He's like, I'm going for a walk. And he gets up and he leaves. I don't know about you guys. This is super encouraging to me. Because it's okay, good. This is normal. This type of back and forth, the challenges that come along with intimacy are not abnormal, even thousands of years ago in a Hebrew context. And then later on in chapter 7, he says this to her. Because she said, he didn't answer. She's bummed he's gone. And then in 7, verses 1 and 2, he says, how beautiful your sandaled feet, O princess daughter. Your graceful legs are like jewels, the work of an artist's hand. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine. So you can see him pursuing to reconnect with her, right? And then 7, 9, and 10, she says, may the wine go straight to my beloved, flowing gently over lips and teeth. I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. So you see this mutual reconnecting in their relationship. And then verse 11 and 12, 7, come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. Let us go early to the vineyards to see the vines have budded, if their blossoms have opened and the pomegranates are in bloom. And there I will give you my love. So they basically, right? So here's just give you the picture. He kind of is like, hey. And she's like, no. And he's like, fine. And he gets up and goes for a walk. And then she's like, oh, what happened? And then he goes, hey, I'm still for you. And she goes, well, I'm still for you. And then she goes, hey, why don't we go do a lover's vacation for a weekend? Let's get out in the vineyards. Right? Here's why I tell you the story. Intimacy is sustained graciously. It ebbs and it flows. It's up and it's down. And it's a beautiful reality that in the complexity of what it means to have an intimate relationship, it's going to take work. It's going to mean daily laying your life down. It's going to mean daily letting go of your desires and your wants and what you think should happen and how it should happen, and perpetually pointing yourself at the other person over and over again and extending grace perpetually. See, because intimacy is not linear. There's no silver bullet. You're not going to figure out the one thing that's going to fix it and suddenly make it magically work. Because why? We're all fallen, broken humans. We live in a fallen, broken world. We all have fractures in our view of each other, fractures in our relationship, fractures in our view of sexuality, and all of that comes together along with circumstance and a million other things to make it really, really challenging. And so here's what you got to do. You got to make room for the mess. Like, you have to be okay with the fact that it's going to be messy. And you have to be willing to extend tons of grace to one another. And you have to be willing to communicate to one another. You have to be willing to say, like, hey, like when you did that, that hurt my feelings. Or you have to be able to say, like, hey, like I want to be with you right now, but I'm exhausted. Or I'm frustrated. Or I'm wounded. Or whatever it is. If we're not willing to pursue the relational connectedness, the sexual intimacy is irrelevant. It does not fix it. It never will. It is a gift. So we have to make room for the mess. And the win isn't great sex. The win is great intimacy. The win is the connectedness. And the reality is that will never happen if sexual satisfaction is basically operating as a god in your life. And what we see throughout this letter, or this book, is this consistent pursuit of one another and protection over one another. That there is the safety in, if you read all the way through it, that allows for that vulnerability with each other. You see intimacy in terms of emotional, physical, and relational, that all those are interconnected. They're never separated from one another. They work in concert with one another, which is why I've had to bounce around so much in the book, because you can't just go like, oh, here's the intimacy piece about physical, and here's the one about, it's all interwoven together. Why? Because you and I are holistic beings. We don't live compartmentalized. My emotional health has a significant impact on my physical health, right? It all works together in concert. So you see that intimacy of emotional, physical, and relational. You also see expression. You see them saying it to one another. Like, I really can't wait to be with you. I really want to spend time with you. You're hot, right? Like, you see a lot of that going on back and forth. There's a sense that it is verbal, it is articulated to one another and expressed physically as well. And it's an ongoing process. We never arrive. But it's built on this lifelong commitment. Or a better term, to use a Bible term, would be a lifelong covenant. And what a covenant is biblically is this idea of I'm in for you even when you don't reciprocate. Like, covenant relationships are not quid pro quo. It's not like, well, as long as you do this, then I'll do this and we'll be cool. That's a transactional relationship. The Bible sets out as this idea of covenant, which is I'm 100% committed to you, even in the times when you can't reciprocate that love to me. I will be for you above everyone else, even in the times when you can't be for me completely. And when both parties are doing that, when both parties are like, hey, I'm for you and you're for me, and like my singular desire is to see you fully satisfied relationally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and the other person's going, yeah, and I want to see you physically flourish and emotionally flourish and relationally flourish. When that happens, there's no safer place for people to be. No safer place. Because there's room for you to be messy. There's room for mistakes. There's room for the bumps in the road, right? And that's how God's designed it to see. And I want you to turn here. Turn to chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. Because she kind of summarizes the whole song in these couple of verses. She says this: place me like a seal over your heart. She's talking to her husband. Like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death. Its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned. That's a picture of a covenant. She says, hey, place me as a seal on your heart, which means like place me as a seal on like all your emotions, all of your thoughts, all of your desires. Like let me be the connected to that, right? And then she says, place me as a seal on your arm. In other words, all of your actions, how we live together. It's a picture of this unbreakable devotion to one another. A marriage covenant between a man and a woman. And the term in the Hebrew there for love is ahaba. You want to say, let's do some Hebrew, ready? Say it out loud. Ahaba. There you go. You just learned Hebrew. There you go. And what ahava is, it's more than just a sentimental feeling of love. Like that's how we, in modern construct, we translate love as a feeling. It's so much more than that. Love in this sense is this idea of a steadfast devotion and desire. So it's not just desire or devotion, it's both, working together in concert with one another. And what does she say? She says, love, this kind of love is as strong as death, which means it's universal and it's irresistible. 1 out of 1 people die. Nobody escapes it. And so she's like, hey, that type of love is as strong as death. And then she says its jealousy is as unyielding as the grave. Now, we think of jealousy in the negative sense, right? Like we always think of jealousy in negative. The term here is really this idea of loyalty. So loyalty is probably a better translation there. So she's like, hey, its loyalty, love's loyalty is as unyielding as the grave. In other words, it's fiercely committed. It burns like a blazing fire, which means it's relentless and encompassing. Many waters can try and put it out. None of them can do it. Many waters try and sweep it away. They can't do it. And then she says, if one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned. In other words, you can't buy it. It's not transactional. Love is not something that you can purchase. It is not a commodity to be traded. It's a covenant to be delighted in. Sexual intimacy is a beautiful, life-giving gift that's given to us by the Lord. But it's his, not yours. It's his gift. It's not yours. You don't get to redefine it. You don't get to determine how it works. His design, his idea, frankly, his guidelines. Because he is a good father who gives good gifts. And he created you to flourish in it. And so then the question becomes, are you going to trust him? Are you going to trust him with it? Are you going to let him be the giver of gifts as he's designed it and desires it to be? Will you take the time to give yourself fully to the other person? Will you see this idea of sexual intimacy as more than just a transactional thing that makes you feel better, but truly as a means, a gift that God has given us by which our relationships continue to flourish? It's not the only means, but it is a significant one. Will you be wise about restraining and protecting the gift that he's offering? And making sure that you don't give it before it's time? Will you think about the desire and be willing to go, okay, like I have desires, but just because I have desires doesn't mean I have to live them out, or doesn't mean I have to play them out. In fact, I need to restrain them. At the beginning, I told you about the girl I made the mixtape for. That was the girl at 14 that I lost my virginity to. Relationship didn't last long. But I didn't know, I wasn't a believer at the time. But I do know that for me, in my season of life at that time, sexual gratification was definitely a source of identity and something I pursued. I'd grown up in a house where pornography was bathroom reading material. That's not an excuse. I'm responsible for my decisions. But ultimately, sexuality from a very young age had been like wildly presented inappropriately for me. And so it created patterns and ongoing struggles and challenges for me that I had to carry with me. And oftentimes those meant hiding and fear and shame. And ultimately, I had to come to the end of myself. I became a Christian about a year after that experience. But even then, like that didn't fix it all. I wish it would have. But it wasn't like I came to Jesus and suddenly I was perfectly lined up. No. There was a lot of fumbling and stumbling along the way from there on out. And then in my 20s, I meet this girl and we start dating. And this is I had literally said to the Lord, like, okay, I'm done. Like I keep messing this stuff up. I'm not looking for a girlfriend. Like I'm out. And then I meet this girl and we start dating. And I'm terrified that I'm going to mess up this relationship. It's like we didn't kiss for 6 months. I was terrified. And it turns out that this girl, before me, had never even kissed a boy. And I remember the moment vividly when the Lord was like, yeah, you don't deserve her. You didn't preserve yourself. but I kept her for you. And that's what grace is. And that's the gospel. The gospel is the reality that we don't deserve anything. I did not deserve the wife that I got. And yet the Lord saw fit to preserve her. And she saw fit to preserve herself when I was unfaithful, repeatedly in my youth. See, the beauty of the gospel is that we're not defined by our failures or our successes for that matter. Sin does have an impact, but it doesn't define us. It doesn't drive us. Because when we're in Christ, when we place our faith in Jesus, what happens then now? Jesus now defines me. Who I am, how I live, what I'm about, it's all defined by Jesus. So then what that does is it frees my heart from having to try and find value elsewhere. I don't have to find value in my marriage. Like I don't have to find my identity there. I don't have to find my identity in my sexuality. My identity is in Christ because I am his son, I am his child. And I am forgiven and I am free and I'm loved and I'm cherished. And that frees me up to then to be able to share myself with someone else. Did all of that have an impact on our marriage? Absolutely. Did not go smoothly. There were tears, there was counseling, there's plenty of messes to go around. But I can tell you for sure that I am a testimony of God's redeeming, restoring, and renewing grace. Married for 24 years-ish. I should have thought that through ahead of time. Over 20, we'll go there. And here's where I want to leave you, is that, look, I am proof that our God is all about fixing broken things. That's what he does. That's the game he plays. And he delights in it. He is not put off by your mess. He's not put off by the brokenness in your life. He's not put off by your struggle with pornography. He's not put off by your struggle in your marriage. He's not put off by your imbalanced libido. And he's saying, come on, bring it to me and let's deal with it. And let me give you hope. Let me give you the joy that you can find in me. Let me help to heal some of these wounds. Let me help to bring you a new thought process. And I know in a room this size with this many people, there is plenty of hurt, pain, and damage that's both been done by us, but also done to us. There are some of us in here struggling with pornography and lust. There are some of us who did not preserve or protect the gift, and they feel shame, you feel loss. And there are some of us who have had that gift stolen from us. And there's trauma around that, and there's hurt, and there's wounds, and there's kind of control, all these things that go on. And there are marriages in this room that are right now feeling dead and lifeless. And I'm telling you, it doesn't have to stay that way. I promise you. We have a God who is all about bringing healing, redemption, and restoration to broken things. And it gives me the freedom to stand up here and tell you the story and be like, yeah, like look it. Like God's doing amazing things. It's the last thing I would have wanted to teach, but I was so glad I got the opportunity to because it resonates so deeply with my own story. So we're going to transition into a time of worship. And here's what I'm going to say, like, don't leave. Your kids are going to be fine. I know the trick. Get them out before the line. Don't go anywhere. Because who knows what the Lord wants to tell you right now? Remember I said at the beginning, like all of us want to take personal responsibility for what God and the Spirit may want to be shaping and molding inside of us. And so this time of reflexive worship, this is going to be an opportunity for us to wrestle through that. And so stay. Ask the Lord, even now, I'm going to pray in a second. As I pray, just ask the Lord, like, Lord, show me what you want me to see. Help me to see how I can help develop and bring healing and hope to my relationships. Tell me the things I need to confess. Bring it to him and ask him to bring you the hope and the healing that you need. And here's the other thing I'd say. Don't keep it to yourself. Look, sin, shame, and trauma, they all thrive in isolation. And so like we have, like some of our elders will be over on the side. I'll be over here too. If you just need someone to pray for, you don't have to share all the details. You don't have to share the story. But if you just need prayer, like walk over. If you're super bold as a couple, walk over and ask to be prayed for. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't stuff it down. That doesn't fix anything. But lay it before the Lord, lay it before people who love you and want to walk with you, and then see what God does. Because I can tell you, he's really good at fixing broken things. Let me pray for us, and then we're going to move into a time of worship and response. Jesus, we thank you for today. And Lord, I thank you. Like, you know what I think. And I pray, Lord, that you would use this time to help us to see the areas that you want to grow and shape and challenge in us, but also in this time of worship, we would see your goodness and your love. That we would see that we aren't slaves to the sin, that we aren't slaves and in bondage to the brokenness and the mistakes that we've made and the sin that we've lived in and the failures that we've had, but that there's freedom because of who you are and what you've done. Lord, give us a new hope in that. Some of us maybe know that intellectually, but it's just honestly, the experience has been less than that. So Father, we pray that in this time of response, that as you do a work in our heart, that we would respond, that we would sing full-hearted and full-throated about your goodness and about your grace and about your mercy, Lord. And I pray for boldness over everyone in this room, that if you were prompting them to come and share, to get prayer, that they would do so. That our church would be a church that is known for flourishing relationally, sexually, emotionally. This would be a safe place for us to wrestle through these things and to walk in freedom from the shame and the pain that comes along with it so often. We give you this time. We thank you for your love, your grace, and we thank you most of all for your son, Jesus, who bore the weight of all of this brokenness so that we could have life. We give you this time in your son's name. Amen.